better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll those dice.
Howdy, Rob.
Howdy, Matt. And good evening, listeners.
Good evening, listener. Hey, howdy to you too. Thanks for
That's
being
right.
here.
Howdy. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in to Dungeon Master of None with your DMs, Matt and Rob. What are we talking about tonight, Matt?
Well, we're talking about artists who start off their art.
We might even be
much
talking
better,
about artistes.
Artistes. Much better than we have started off this episode, right? They'll start things off with a bang. They'll have a distinctive style. Right. Webster's defines it as an artist with a distinctive approach, particularly applied to filmmakers, video game designers. We're talking about auteurs.
Auteurs, French for the author. Actually, is that true? I don't know if that's true.
I have no idea, Rob. You should have looked this up.
I'm just gonna roll with it. No, but yeah, auteur theory, or the idea of the auteur, as I understand it, and Matt and I are a little bit out over our skis on this one because neither of us are
for sure
film experts. But bear with us because the concept is important. But I think this comes from, I don't know, like French New Wave cinema. It's a way of talking about people or certain filmmakers, certain creators, and their approach to specifically the act of filmmaking. But I do think it can apply to other things, perhaps
like tabletop role-playing games,
which we'll get to. But yeah, what makes an auteur, Matt?
Well, I don't really know. But I think for tabletop role-playing games, right, I think there are some designers that, at least in my opinion, which this is going to be, is Rob and Matt's opinions on things, designers who have like just this incredible like vision that sets their games apart, and that vision they're able to lots of it's not the only thing. It's vision plus like the ability to manifest it through like some cool mechanic or design or advice writing in their rules that just you just don't always see.
As I understand it, when it comes to films, a lot of it is having strong creative control, or maybe even like absolute creative control, like the ability to sort of like dictate the film, and as compared to like, you know, working with a big studio or something. And what happens with
it's the difference between like Paul Thomas Anderson getting an extra like $20 million from whatever to make one battle after another, and you know, making a film for Disney or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, and to be clear, like auteurs isn't inherently good or bad. There are auteurs that are very talented, and there are auteurs who are not so talented. There's two Paul Andersons that are both technically auteurs. One is responsible for One Battle After Another, and the other is responsible for Monster Hunter 2024. So, you know, I'm just saying, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that like an auteur's output is not inherently better, but it is kind of interesting. And one of the things that's kind of cool is if you look at the body of work of a guy like, again, Paul Thomas Anderson, over the years, you see a lot of both like his development as a creator and the things that are important to him, the themes. And it's just interesting, right? You get things that you won't get out of a big budget studio production because one person is sort of executing their vision. The vision isn't always good, but like it's interesting. I think
right.
that there's a reason why many filmmakers, whether they're auteurs themselves or not, cite auteurs as their inspiration, because they do interesting things, and because of sort of like the scale and the level of control, they can be a little bit more creative and dynamic than in other creative contexts. That's the theory anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I I don't know anything about John Luke Goddard or any of those fancy folks, Rob, but I do know about role-playing games, and I think the analogy fits a little bit, right? In that all role-playing game creation is by necessity a collaborative process. You have to have people play your game to make a game. And often it's written by lots of different people contributing to the book, right? It's by like a big studio or a company. But sometimes, right, because the barriers to entry, other than printing a book, right, are fairly low, right? You can make a game essentially almost by yourself, right? You still need those collaborators. And again, like film, it's an iterative art form, right? You're drawing on what has gone before, but like the I don't know, there's some designers who like push the bounds and come up with, I think, a new way, or they've built on certain aspects of TTRPG design where by combining those, you've got something like really new that expresses some kind of very cool vision.
I think this is a useful lens because, well, unlike film, there's like no such thing as a studio
Your
model,
mom's
or
a useful
there's spicy, Matt.
Sorry.
There's
Doesn't
one.
make any sense.
There's one. You try to derail me, and it's working. There's like one basically like big company, right? There's the elephant in the room, and they're not really funding people to make anything that's not D&D, right? So basically everything that's different and unique is likely to be.
That's not true. They made like Exodus, the role-playing game, a game no one has played yet.
Okay, sorry. An aside,
Yeah.
They're not doing
No,
anything that's like that's
you're
not like
absolutely
an
right, yeah.
entry point into like video games or Funko Pops. All right, like they have no interest in funding like creatives. Like this is the thing. Like a big studio will sometimes give some filmmaker a big chunk of change and like let them execute their creative vision. That doesn't really happen in the TTRPG space. You're either doing something for a long-term existing property, or you're kind of doing it yourself. And this is a point for me to emphasize that auteur and independent are not the same thing. Like Matt Colville is an independent RPG creator. I don't think I would describe him as an auteur because his process is very collaborative, and he has brought in a lot of like other people to work with him at MCDM. He probably has written some things like just himself, but I think he falls outside.
He's written a bunch of fantasy novels. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are a lot of the and they're mostly fellas. We're going to talk about tonight are auteurs because they have written things that are almost entirely like their unique creative vision. The distinction can be fuzzy, but like I do think it is a good way to think about TTRPGs, because there are a lot of auteurs or people who are doing auteur-like stuff because it is a relatively, like Matt said, low barrier to entry, relatively inexpensive to make a game, and it's a place where you can do interesting and creative things.
Yeah.
For the moment.
Yeah, I think it's cool to have seen the emergence of just a handful of mid-sized companies that publish role-playing games that are willing to like take someone's game and like and publish it, right? Like I'm thinking of like Morkborg and Free League Publishing.
So I said that
you're
like
absolutely right. On
never
the,
happens
on the
but
whole,
it's rare,
right? It's and I think so if you can't tell from our conversation so far, this is Matt and Rob at our most pretentious, and so you can completely ignore this. And we should also point out, right? Glenn Cook's novels might be just as enjoyable to you as whatever new like fancy fiction lit that came out is. Mission Impossible 7 is maybe just as fun to watch as Paul Thomas Anderson. I think the same applies to games. You can play Kids on Bikes, a game that I would describe as not pushing the like bounds of design, but I think is still, for the people who like it, a really fun game. And you don't have to think about any of the auteurs that we're going to talk about at all. Rob and I just find it interesting. And also, as a side note, we're not the authority on who is not an auteur, if they even exist.
Yeah, and some of these people may disagree with our categorization, and that's fine. And I think sort of why, well, we want to talk about it because we're nerds, but I think if it's important at all, in the same way that it works in film, is that these games and these people are very influential. Some of these games are popular, but even if they're not like popular, if they're not like big sellers, they're highly influential on other designers. And I think that's sort of like worth like reflecting on and looking into and knowing about, even if you aren't like doing game design yourself. I think it's very like helpful and useful and interesting to know where the sort of like mechanical and ideas, where the roots of more popular, more modern games come from. And I think that's one of the interesting things about looking at TTRPG auteurs.
I mean, that's like how I went through my own process to try and find some of the designers we're just about to talk about. Is like, hey, what are the mechanics that I think are really cool? What are the design vision things that I really love? And then what was the game that like kind of did that first or does that in a really cool way, and who designed it? And then what else did they design?
Exactly. It's just to think about, you don't get a lot of modern film without Tarkovsky or Scorsese, right? Like every filmmaker is influenced by these people. You don't have to know that. Like, you don't need to know anything about that to enjoy any of these films, but it can deepen your understanding and enjoyment. I like that. In the same way, I think that knowing this about tabletop can also potentially deepen your enjoyment. If this sounds boring or pretentious to you, feel free to check out. It won't hurt my feelings.
It won't hurt ours, but if you're not interested in who is and who is not an auteur, and frankly, I think Rob and I, at the end of the day, are not either, stick around for a discussion of some interesting design ideas. So another way to frame this whole episode is interesting design ideas. And should we get to our first auteurs?
Let's jump into it, because this will be helpful to sort of talk about.
I think I want to start with McGay and Vincent Baker, if that's okay with you.
Good place to start. Yep.
And so I don't,
and good timing too, because we'll get to it in a minute, but yeah.
It's great timing, and we'll include some links to that timing in just a second. But I don't know that much about them other than they're a couple that design games. I know that a lot of their design ideas came from the indie wave of the late 90s and early aughts, centered around an internet forum, The Forge, right?
The Forge.
And they are...
We'll have to do a deep dive on The Forge itself someday.
Absolutely.
Because,
absolutely. There's a book sitting on my shelf about The Forge that I have yet to read. But they're prolific game designers. They've together made dozens of games, and they've made dozens of games individually, right? They're true embodiments of the idea that hey, you have most of the resources to make a game, and the ones that you don't, you can kind of learn and pick up, like layout and design. And while they have editors and co-authors on some games, it's clear that a lot of their games are I had an idea for one cool game that does one cool thing, and let me put together a rule book that's not too long. So that's the big picture. And their biggest game that most, I think, people who know more than one role-playing game system know about is a game called Apocalypse World.
Yeah. And like I said, this is timely. They've just launched a Kickstarter for Apocalypse World 3E, and I'm pretty excited about it. We have somehow not talked about Apocalypse World directly yet, but when we say influential, it's sort of hard to overstate how influential Apocalypse World and the Powered by the Apocalypse rule set it spawned is. And the game itself, I think, well, that's why they're doing a new edition. I think it's showing its age a little bit, but for the time, it was revolutionary, and it is it's simple, fun, a really great framework for a bunch of different types of games, and very, very easy to hack, which is part of the reason why it is so popular and so influential.
Right. I think one of the, here's a tick mark in the auteur category, is that probably more people have played games that use the same basic rules system as Apocalypse World, powered by the Apocalypse, than have played Apocalypse World. Masks, City of Mists, Urban Shadows, even games like Brindlewood Bay are like almost, maybe they don't use the term powered by the Apocalypse, but they are very, very close to the rule system in here. And if you want to support the bakers, and their game design, their Kickstarter for Apocalypse World Burned Over is on Kickstarter until December 19th, 2025.
And this is the origin. Was it the origin of of sort of using GM moves and player moves to organize your actions, and a simple sort of like 2d6 resolution system. It's more complicated than that, but like the core idea, the structure upon which it's built is that. And like we've said, it's hugely malleable and very useful for people who want to design their own games narratively. It's a very good system for telling a certain type of narrative or creating a type of narrative game.
I think it's important. Their games are important entries in the canon of establishing what is like a fiction first game. I want to highlight 3 like clear design innovations from this game, which is the big one overall is that everything ties together to like what is wrong with this world that we're playing in, right? The theme, it's highly thematic and very specific to Apocalypse World. But the ones that have spawned a million copies are the idea of like, instead of having character classes, you have these playbooks, and the way your specific character in a role-playing game is defined is often by their special moves that no one else can do, and they're so easy to pick up, and they're so easy to GM that like it's no surprise that other people want to do games that, I just need to write 3 moves for 5 different playbooks, and I have a game that sort of gets the tone and feel of my world out perfectly.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I tend to expect a little bit more from designers these days, but you can make your own Powered by the Apocalypse hack and tell an entirely unique story, an entirely different type of narrative theme to your world or whatever you want to do, simply by creating new playbooks and new moves. You can just write up a new list, and that's very doable. And all you need is sort of like a good vision and a strong, authorial voice yourself, and you've got like basically an entirely new game. It's a really nifty framework. And if you, by the way, are thinking about game design, if you're interested in doing game design, I think a great place to start is just to do a Powered by the Apocalypse hack. If you just want to if you're like, I kind of want to make my own game, or I want to like try my hand at this and I'm not sure where to start, this is a great thing to just sort of like get your feet wet, because anybody can do it, and it's very easy to pick it up and run with it.
I think another interesting part of their design is, so we talked about, framing playbooks are often defined by their moves. There's usually some general moves. There's also MC, Master of Ceremonies, or Game Master moves, right? Which are just like, instructions on how to make this story interesting in response to what the players are doing. Separate your players, right? Put someone on the spot, take away their stuff, turn their move back on them, right? Tell them the possible consequences for what they're doing and ask. It's just like a great way of framing GM advice that is influential in almost every game that's coming out today.
Yeah. This is a hugely influential mechanic on Daggerheart, which is in other ways very, very distinct from Apocalypse World, from Powered by the Apocalypse. But like this idea is key to Daggerheart, and that's just sort of like a critical example of like how far-reaching this game is and the Baker's influences.
The other like super influential design aspect from this from these game designers is the kind of failure, mixed success, critical success like chart. It's not presented in this book as a chart, but you can see how it is. Let me give you an example of what we're talking about. Read a person. This is one of the basic moves of the game. When you read a person in a charged interaction, roll plus sharp. On a 10 plus, hold 3. On a 7 to 9, hold 1. While you're interacting with them, spin your hold to ask their player questions, one for one, right? And the questions are things like, is your character telling the truth? What's your character really feeling? What does your character intend to do? How could I get your character to do blank?
This will probably sound familiar to a lot of you because it's in a lot of things, and it's a very simple to understand and very, like other things, very malleable, very workable system, and it can fit in all kinds of things. And a lot of designers lean on something that is either precisely this or a lot like it. We'll talk about John Harper's Blades in the Dark a little bit later, but it's not precisely powered by the apocalypse, but it has strong roots in it, and it uses a similar resolution system because it is so elegant. It works so well, and it's simple.
Two other like cool like auteur-ish design innovations, Firebrands, which I believe is by McGay Baker, just like a game without roles, full of romance silliness about mech pilots getting into romance shenanigans, has such clear, and a lot of their games have this, clear directions for how to play your characters, right? Your goal is to try to get your character into messy entanglements with others, unquote, right? And I think they also have done this in a game by D. Vincent Baker, Dogs in the Vineyard, where like, hey, it's like, here are your instructions as players, and then here are the like actual charges to your characters. You must do this, like, and this is a game about faith, sin, and judgment. So it's like, hey, here are the tenets of your faith. Here are the things that are sins. This is how you can met out judgment.
Yeah, Dogs in the Vineyard is interesting. It's now, I think they stopped selling it. They discontinued it. I think the Bakers decided that they didn't like some of the elements of it. It is a really interesting game, and it's one that I read or hear being cited by a lot of game designers. I think it is also influential beyond its sort of popularity or reach, because it is an interesting game with a lot of neat mechanics and unique ideas, and it came relatively early, right before the flourishing of games that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, one of those like really interesting mechanics that I think is not part of the problematic part that caused the author to maybe not disown it but stop making money off of it is the escalate mechanic, right? There are a couple levels of interaction, talking, fighting, and like shooting when you break it down. And at any time, if you're losing one of those things, you can always choose to escalate, right? And then get new dice for your mechanics. And all of the mechanics, I think this is a really interesting design idea, wrap around this idea of faith and sin and judgment that the players, that is what the game is about. But there's no like faith score. So I would say my last like auteur point for their games is there's no apocalypse score. There's no dog faith score in their faith game. There's no romance score in Firebrands, but those games are still very much about those things. And this is like, I think Vincent Baker has called this at one point the fruitful void. So like all of your mechanics wrapping around something that doesn't have a mechanical thing. He's called it in another tweet, design your games to pose a question and then don't design it to trample on the answers.
I mean, which is a really terrific design principle. It's a really great way to think about things.
Great. Who should we talk about next? Thank you, Bakers. Check out their Kickstarter.
Let's pivot And I want to talk about another auteur in sort of a different direction. I want to talk about Monty Cook. And listeners are probably familiar with Monty Cook, but he's really interesting to me because his sort of career is kind of unique. Monty Cook has a long history of working in RPGs. He worked on, like, from the early 80s on, he worked on Rollmasters, Champions. He wrote for TSR, and then when TSR, when D&D went to WotC, he wrote for them. He wrote for the Marvel RPG. He contributed to Planescape, White Wolf. And he did this through, through the 2000s. He was doing this for 20, 30 years. And his output during this time, by the way, was good. I don't want to dwell on it because it's not really critical to the discussion, but like one of my favorite adventures in any D&D edition is Salvage Operation, Salvage something.
Yeah.
Which is in the Ghosts of Saltmarsh collection. It's a great adventure. One of my favorites, Monty Cook original.
I'll just add one of my favorite campaign settings for D&D is Ptolis or Tolis, the city
right.
by the spire. We should
I'm
do a whole episode on that, but yeah.
I know. I'm hand-waving a bunch of this stuff because a lot of what Monty Cook did prior to what we're going to talk about was campaign setting and
adventure design.
Lore. Yeah, really good stuff too. Tolis? I've never said it out loud before.
Tolis?
Is really cool, and there's a bunch of stuff like that. We'll come back around to it. But he worked on 4E and was for a hot minute the lead designer on 5E, but left in 2012 before the release, citing creative differences with the company, but not with fellow designers. Cook leaves Wizards in 2012, drops off of 5E, hands over the reins to other people. So I actually have literally no idea. Much has been speculated, like how much his fingerprints are on the final product, but I'm comfortable because I generally like Monty Cook, saying that everything that's wrong with it is somebody else's fault. So that's
right. That's an auteur theory thing to believe. Sure.
That is. But almost immediately he launches a Kickstarter for Numenera, which is his thing. And Numenera is a science fantasy setting that is built on what is now the Cypher system. And we did a very, very early on, we did an episode on Numenera, which we'll link. And it's neat. It's a D20 system. It's you're doing science fantasy stuff 1 billion years in the future. You have weird tech. You're delving into vaults. It's like Wolf. It's like Book of the New Sun, except a lot nicer and less weird. But like it's it's fun science fantasy stuff. But the sort of like the key innovation, the key difference in Numenera, that even though it bears a lot of rough similarity to other D20 systems, is everything is a difficulty system. So your DC is 4 times the level of either the task or the creature you're trying to fight. So if it's a level 1 task, you're looking for a DC of 4. If it's a level 4 task, it's a 12. This is something that persists throughout Cook's sort of design career to the present, and but he builds on it. But this is the sort of like key idea of the Cypher system. It also includes pools, and we love pools.
Yeah. So for me, that's the coolest auteuring design, right? Is that you don't have to, I think he even talked about this in one of his design blogs, right? Is this idea that like, I like the basic like simulationist mechanics of a D20 system. It's really frustrating that you can't put any extra effort to be like, hey, I really want to succeed. Many other systems solve this in a different way, but he has a great solution for this kind of thing, right? Which these pools, hey, you can spin points to like, no. This time I have to succeed. And that's at the cost of not succeeding at other points. But yeah.
The reason why I started with the difficulty system is that the way that it works with the pools, which is you can reduce your pools, expend effort to reduce the difficulty, right? You're not giving yourself, there's the reason why I think this is interesting is it's there are bonuses and penalties, but you're more manipulating the precise target. And this may seem not important, but I think there's an elegance to it, and I think it works very nicely and intuitively. And this sort of ideas of pools and efforts and levels, difficulty is a key through line. And I think Numenera is a really like nice system, and I think it models a lot of the fun things about D&D style play. But like Monty Cook exactly talks about this in his design blogs, his design theory, you can actually decide, hey, I really need to pass this thing, or I really need to like expend energy and resources to succeed, which just makes it feel a little bit more engaged. So Numenera is a smash hit. It's very successful. Right. Kickstarter goes gangbusters for the time. It's now sort of like it's a relatively modest haul compared to like some of what happens these days. But for the time, it was a big hit.
Yeah, I think for me, the other interesting like auteurism of Monty Cook is that he's really I think every one of the people we're going to talk about designs a really cool like system, campaign, world, right? But Monty Cook has married that with like, I'm also going to give you a really in-depth explanation of that world, right? And again, this is for certain types of GMs and players that like that, but like with Numenera, with Ptolus, and with what you might be wanting to bring up next, Invisible Sun, like he is really, really good at describing in depth that world.
Yeah, well, and this is part of like I think what makes him interesting as a designer and as an auteur is Monty Cook is a graduate. I didn't know this until I was doing the research, but a graduate from the Clarion Writers Workshop, which is the sort of like the best science fiction fantasy writers workshop there is. He graduated in 1999, and he's written a couple of novels. I think mostly tie-ins, like Forgotten Realms books. And I hope that he doesn't listen to this and get mad because I don't mean it as an insult. But there are GMs that are frustrated novelists, right? There are people who really want to be writing a novel, but they can't or won't, aren't having any luck, and so they inflict their novel on their players. And we have talked about these people in the past. There are also novelists that are frustrated world builders, and I don't know that Monty Cook is frustrated, but I think his real like passion and strength comes from world building. And I think we can see this in Ptolus, we can see this in Numenera, and we can see this in Invisible Sun. He writes great games, and they're well written, but his I think real talents, his game design is good. I like it a lot, but his real talents come with the world building that is married to that design. And yeah, Invisible Sun is like the most auteur thing that has ever auteured. It is a literal black box with a utterly bonkers campaign setting, a bunch of like it comes with its own like not tarot deck, and all this like it's we've talked about it before. It's impossible to explain. It's also it's believe it or not, at its core not that complicated. We spent a whole
episode trying to explain it.
Because it uses a sort of like everything is based on levels. So like the fundamental thing is you are rolling dice and trying to hit a certain number and using your pools to manipulate that in the same way that you do in the Cypher system, except there's like a dozen subsystems and other things that sort of like impact those numbers and whatever. It's fun. It's weird. This is, I think, a great example of auteur theory in action, because it's not that like a group of designers can't be creative, but there are certain things that you'll look at and there's no way that this could have ever have come to exist without like one person's insane vision like being the driving force. And there's lots of films like that, and I think there's lots of TTRPGs like that. And Invisible Sun, I think, is a good game and worth playing if you are a weirdo in the right type of way. It's not like he made something that like isn't good or interesting, but there's no way that like a group of people would have sat down and produced this. This is clearly like the singular vision of a person with a lot of like passion for certain types of stories and games. And also esoteric, lore.
Yes.
But it's really it's interesting to see the evolution of this,
I also think it's interesting to see someone come out of the, if we want to say it this way, the studio system, make a name for themselves on their own, and then essentially create their own studio and foster the development of game systems of a lot of other people by Monty Cook games, right?
Yeah.
The Magnus Archives, Old Gods of Appalachia. There's a bunch of games that they have made that are not written by Monty Cook, but are part of his publishing company now.
Yeah, some of them are Cypher System spinoffs. Some of them are their own thing, and yeah, the Monty Cook Games now is its own game company, its own studio, kind of, and is fostering a lot of cool stuff. I think he's very interesting because very few of these like OG D&D guys broke free from it. And I like his like influences are clear, but he left and then immediately made a different game. And I'm actually, I shouldn't be impressed by that, but I am impressed. I'm like, because so many of them just wanted to keep doing D&D or D&D type things, and Monty Cook was like, no, I have ideas, man. I'm gonna do something weird. And then he went and did it, which is just, it's very, very rare.
Yeah. Anything else we want to say? I mean, there's a million more things that we can say about
so many more things.
Any number of his games, Stealing Stories for the Devil, a bunch of other ones that are really interesting. But should we move on to another designer?
Yeah, we'll probably talk about a couple of these in depth at some point. But yeah, let's move on to another designer.
Okay, I want to add to our, Rob and Matt's opinion auteur list, Grant Howitt. Grant, I didn't research anything about the background, just looking at the games that this designer has produced, and I would say Grant is the master of a couple of things. But the first I want to bring up is the one-page RPG. Grant has produced dozens of these, most famously Honey Heist, but we should talk about a couple other ones that are just incredibly full of vision, full of fun for probably one night only, that are brilliant like vehicles for doing a cool game quickly.
Honey Heist, you may have heard us talk about. I'm sure we talked about it. You may even be familiar with it. You can look it up. You can look up the whole game. It's one page. But how do I say this without sounding? Honey Heist is for some reason also like one of maybe the most influential games to like exist in the TTRPG space that's not Dungeons and Dragons. For whatever, there have been one-page RPGs, and we'll talk about another one in a minute before this, but this one just sort of like broke containment, and it's because it's funny and because it's great, and because it's easy to read and understand and play. It's been featured on all kinds of like actual play podcasts, and there's now a gajillion one-page RPGs, which is good. They're fun. This is also in the same way that if you are curious about game design and want to try your hand at something, an equally easy thing to do as a Powered by the Apocalypse hack is just do one of these one-page RPGs. But yeah, Honey Heist is a very fun, very easy to play one-page RPG, which I think by his own admission, he just slapped out in an afternoon or something like that.
Yeah, I think the like cool design part is like, hey, be willing to like limit yourself and be willing to say interesting things in a very small amount of text and rules, right? Honey Heist, says, here's the vision for the game. You have a plan that requires complex timing, and you're also a bear. And you have to deal with that. Another one that I've had fun with is Jason Statham's Big Vacation. You're a group of security, PR, and media people who have to keep Jason Statham happy. It's just like, oh, this is a funny concept, but I think a lot of humor in role-playing games gets left on the page and the design isn't thinking about how are we going to make the game itself funny? Most games that I have played in or run are funny as well because people are funny. Humor usually, you never laughed harder than in a conversation with other people, right? Compared to like a movie or a stand-up routine. That's where the biggest jokes are. And that's true with RPGs. But Grant has put a lot of effort into thinking of, okay, this will be funny, not just for me to write, but for people to play.
Yeah. My actual favorite of his is Big Gay Orcs, which is remains one of the best.
I much prefer the sequel, The Orc Pope is Dead.
One of the best sessions.
This is not a joke. This is a real game.
I know it's real, and I haven't played it yet. But which is, again, there's these games work. They're basically like, here's a funny situation. There's basically two options. All of the things you do sort of emerge from the humor of talking and collaborating with other players. And yeah, you can either defend the fortress or make out with other orcs. And it's this is such a, he's made a, I feel like I ought to get bored with these, but every time I'm like, this is funny. It's great. It took me 10 minutes to read this, and it's even something that I might play at like a, if I don't have anything else like prepared. It's a great idea, and the sort of the influence of Honey Heist and games like it is substantial. And I think, a lesson to take from this is that you can build a more complex game, of course, but like kind of like starting with this and building off of it is a good way to think about what type of story you want to tell and what you want your game to do.
Yeah, I think he's very good at creating mechanics that it very quickly express, right, what they need to, right? Honey Heist, right? You have like your bear attribute and your heisting attribute. In Jason Statham's Big Vacation, right, there's a bunch of, it's just, hey, Jason Statham has a bunch of tracks. If they get filled up, he's either sad, arrested, or bored, and you can't let any of those things happen. Because if he's sad, he will break down in tears in public, and then you'll have to deal with it. It's just like, oh, this mechanic is not complicated. It conveys exactly what it needs to. But I think what is like confirms, I think I would put him on my auteur list, even if Grant Howitt had only written one-page role-playing games. But Grant has also written campaigns that are or games that are hundreds of pages long and have very thorough mechanics and character creation and world building. Heart, The City Beneath, and Spire, The City Must Fall, both with Christopher Taylor, are, I think, really great and interesting games. I think for my auteur list, I wanted to highlight the sort of resistance engine, the resistance system that underlies both of them and is, been adapted for many other games, which is essentially like a change maker, a change engine, right? As you play, your characters get the end result of all of the fun mechanical steps along the way of checks is your players getting fallout, which changes their characters, right? It changes them. And so if you want to coming up with, I think everyone was like, oh, we want a system where characters grow over time, and a lot of games have been stuck with, well, you just add new powers. This one's all about giving your characters this fallout, which they have to then deal with, and is going to change their character and have some kind of arc for good or ill.
Heart and Spire are also games that I see or hear game designers mention a lot. These are interesting, influential, and unique games driven by a very, very interesting system. We will probably talk about them at length at some point, but yeah, this does show, I do think this pushes him solidly into the auteur category, because clearly he's shown that he's got the chops doing things across different formats. I mean, I haven't even counted, but got a dozen games if you're counting his one pagers. But the Heart and Spire are very, very interesting things. the resistance, or sorry, what are we called? The resistance engine is a really neat thing. It's a really cool core mechanic.
Who else you got, Rob? Who else is on your auteur list?
Another person that we've talked about before, but I think falls sort of like solidly into the auteur category, is John Harper. And John Harper, when we, has a number of different games, and he's been at this for a little while. I think he also comes out of the Forge ecosystem. I didn't do a lot of listen, if people's backgrounds
this
weren't
is not a
immediately
biography episode.
No.
This is an episode about the interesting things these auteurs have created. So who cares?
I talked about Monty Cook because his past is relevant and interesting, but who knows where John Harper comes from. But he's produced a bunch of games. One of them, but before he hit it big with Blades in the Dark, he wrote a couple of others. So we'll start with Lasers and Feelings, which predates Honey Heist, by the way, by 4 years. And
another one-pager.
An equally delightful one-pager, which is kind of just like a Star Trek adventure. And you either solve your problems with lasers, actual lasers, engineering, science, or whatever, or feelings, your emotions, rhetoric, whatever. And it's in the same way that Honey Heist is really easy to pick up and understand and play, Lasers and Feelings is really fun. You can have a really great Star Trek style adventure with just literally this one page. It's great. You can find it anywhere. Check it out. I love Lasers and Feelings. It's just like Honey Heist, a really easy, fun. Anybody who's seen a Star Trek episode can play Lasers and Feelings.
For me, the biggest auteur-y thing that John does, other than, great design and great writing and, things that apply to lots of games and all the people we're talking about, is his design with loops in mind of a gameplay loop. We talked about this extensively in our Blades in the Dark episode, but I think this applies to Aegon as well. Is it's designed to make you tell a story and then return to some other point so you can tell your players can tell the next story.
Yeah, I think John's one of his strengths is he really understands the rhythm of play, the sort of, yes, this happens and this happens, then we return to point A. And Blades in the Dark masters this. Lasers and Feelings does a good job. Aegon, which we have not talked about at length, or the Paragon system, also does this in a different way. But he's always thinking in his design about how does this play, how does the session progress, and what does it look like to either advance or grow or to change over time. And after Lasers and Feelings, there's Lady Blackbird, which you may have heard of. And Lady Blackbird is really interesting to me. It clearly has a lot of overlap with Blades in the Dark thematically. You're on an airship. There's sky squids. There's, it's sort of Victorian-y, steampunky. It has a lot of, it hits a lot of the same notes as Blades in the Dark. It's a really cool game. You're on an airship with Lady Blackbird. She's supposed to marry somebody. There's a bunch of characters, and kind of you just bounce off of everybody and just sort of see what happens. It all fits in about 10 pages. It's both the whole system and the setting and the story, which I think is a real accomplishment. You can have everything you need to play.
Right.
One
it's almost
very
harder to design than to just design a mechanic system, right?
Yes.
Just to put adventure, setting, and system all together.
And I've been the player in one of these, and it did wrap up in 3.5 hours, which is what it's supposed to, which is very impressive. It is the most impressive thing about Lady Blackbird is that it's possible to play with new players and finish it in a one shot in a reasonable amount of time. It's sort of a precursor of Forged in the Dark. It has some similarities. It is a very, very narrative fiction first, rules light system, so you don't have to know a lot. There's not a ton of mechanics, but it's really cool, really fun. It's got some of the same vibes as Fiasco in terms of how you play, but the real auteur thing, the interesting thing that John Harper does here is, again, setting, game, and and scenario all in like a pretty short document. One, I think, through line that I think is coming out as we're talking that is like many of these designers are managing to write games in less with fewer words. They're managing to create more compact and tighter systems. Yeah, they're able to present their ideas in fewer pages. That's not like a universal auteur thing, but I think given the way that TTRPG design works, we're seeing a lot more of it from this space. Anyway, that's the really cool thing about Lady Blackbird.
Yeah, the next like through line in Harper's design for me is that, and I know not every dungeon master agrees with me. It's not that like his systems are simple or easy to learn or easy to run. Some of them are, some of them are not. Is I think the games are easy to prep. And then once things are going and once you understand, like the mental load on you as a GM is, in my personal experience, very, very light, so that you can focus on the things that really matter at the table.
Yes.
It's like,
yes.
Hey, okay, once you're going, once you've built your crew or your like heroes, they are helping you like create the story, and it just goes, which is why I think the Forged in the Dark system has been very popular for both independent designers and large corporations who are licensing role-playing games to just to use it, because once you're going, it just goes, right? And so I think this ties back to my earlier point about loops, right? It's just really easy to game master his games.
Yeah, and this is, you're exactly right, that in the same way that sort of, I don't know, Tarantino has a theme of gratuitous violence and women's feet, John Harper has
Scorsese's a master of the oneer, and
yes,
he's a master of making things easy on the GM.
John Harper's sort of like, you know, his passion is low prep to zero prep, and no offense to Mr. Harper, I think the level of prep is higher than he thinks it is, but it is lower than in other games. And I have loved running Blades in the Dark because I do have to prep, but I don't have to prep a lot. And he really does succeed at this. His games are really easy to run without having written out like a really complex scenario. They're really easy to adjust on the fly. I appreciate this. We've talked at length about how designers don't do a good job of considering who's going to run their games, and John Harper does think about people who are going to run their games. And there's lots of really interesting through lines. Blades in the Dark obviously is in the same way that like Monty Cook's settings are just like some kind of just birthed from the twisted mind of whatever. Like it's another great example of no group of people could have produced this. Nobody. The only way you could come up with the weird Victorian steampunk dead world whaling society of Blades in the Dark is from one person's mind. But the other cool thing is the actual design elements of Harper's work is focused on being easy to run and easy to prep.
My final designer that I want to talk briefly about is, for my auteur list, is Chris McDowell. And Chris has written Into the Odd, Electric Bastionland, Mythic Bastionland are the games I'm thinking of. And these are all OSR-ish, perhaps. Some people have called them new SR-ish, defining its own genre. And I think the like auteur feature that Chris does really well is like weird, you know, and not the only designer who's done this, obviously, but weird tables that are really good for
the tables.
Guiding either your players or your DM for prepping things, for building creatures, for building hexes, for building NPCs. It's a real mastery of the sort of weirdness that I think can make OSR-ish games great.
Yeah, Mythic Bastionland especially, you can see the influence on a lot of OSR, on a lot of new a lot of OSROC type stuff. It's clearly it has had a impact on people who are interested in this, and it's a great game on its own, but the influence is clear. Like, people who were designing in the space clearly are taking their inspiration from McDowell, and correctly so, because it's great stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can go back to war games and find something that works similar in the next mechanic that I want to highlight that's been incredibly influential, which is just in combat, instead of using whatever system you're using to resolve checks, just rolling damage. And then if you're better at combat, you have a higher damage die. So I don't know if Chris McDowell's Into the Odd was the first book to use this, but I'm pretty sure it was the first like OSR book to use this, which was influential for games like The Black Hack, or one that we've talked about on the show, Nimble 5e, who also
Nimble
use
5e does this,
this mechanic or a modified mechanic, and it works really great, and it's just like such an innovative way, especially for OSR games.
Even if he didn't, I'm not sure if he came up with it, he definitely popularized it. I think that's when it started to get big.
The last cool thing that I think it demonstrates, or is a point of evidence in favor of McDowell's auteurness, is lots of games have collaborative world building, right? In various ways. I think Mythic Bastion Lands like suggestion for collaborative like hex crawling and building hexes, because the instructions, I think, are just the right amount of clarity, are like, to me, the pinnacle of collaborative world building, in that it's like, all right, well, here are some ideas I have, here are some ideas you have, and we're drawing something, but also this isn't the whole game. We're gonna play the game after this, and I think it's a great example of something that exists before, refined and perfected for that particular vision of crazy, weird Arthurian knights in Mythic Bastion Land.
I know it's been on the list, but we could talk about Bastion Land.
Yeah, I know. I know you want to, like, you were the only person in my life who was like, have you seen A24's The Green Knight yet? I was like, and then a couple, 10 years later, someone makes The Green Knight.
Someone makes
the game.
The game, yeah. It is definitely like my type of nerdery. I've got one quick one.
Yeah.
This is also a person we've talked about, and that's Tim Hutchings. And you know him best for 1,000-Year Old Vampire, which is phenomenal, great, a masterpiece, again, sort of the auteur type of creation, because this is really just a game that he slapped out, or probably labored over for years and years and years, but is utterly unique and extremely popular, correctly so, and influential. But he's really interesting. He's less so interesting in terms of creating new mechanics or being necessarily influential in people taking bits of his games, and more, he's an auteur in that the things he does are very, I want to say, like, avant-garde. Like, his
pushing the boundaries of what a role-playing game is.
What a role-playing game is. So 1,000-Year Old Vampire is it's a solo journaling RPG. You understand it. It really, like, elevates and pushes the form, but it's still, like, recognizably a game.
Right.
He's also
I think the
like,
caveat to the art analogy is, unlike a film that's like, this will change your perception of what is a film. That's like, to me, a cue that it's going to be boring. The things Tim Hutchings makes are still fun.
They are still fun.
Yeah.
Some of them fun in a weird way. Like, okay, so like another one he's got as an example is the Apollo 47 Technical Manual, which is a zero prep, sort of like you're just doing like radio chatter with your friends. You can play it like very, very loosely. The game itself is like 30 pages. And sorry, this is just really funny to me. And then it includes over 1,000 pages of NASA manuals, just as like, you know, inspiration and ideas for like the idea is like the moon is now like a boring place in the future, and you're just like doing ho-hum jobs on the moon. And I've looked at the PDF. You can find the PDF. really like great idea. He's also made a book of this. He has a picture on his website of like a gigantic like 5-pound book that is just like 30 pages of game and then 1,000 pages of NASA manuals. Something in a similar vein is the operator's manual for the handheld Bronson articulated deflensing unit.
I love my Bronson deflensing unit.
which is also like a party game, no prep. It's just like it's a technical equipment manual, but is also a game. It's funny because like you can be very clever with games, but like then they can also like not be fun to play. I think Tim manages to make like a game that you actually want to play, but it's also clever. It works because they're short. Like you really can't you really can't do. I know I just said that other game had 1,000 pages, but like the actual game itself is short.
Right.
Like you can't do a lot with this without really like stretching everybody's patience. Those are just two like the best examples. He's got a whole like itch page of things that he's put together that are similarly out there. There's a fun game that I didn't manage to put together that is a Halloween game that sort of like trick-or-treaters coming to your door is the mechanism by which the game advances. It's like very
so again, one night a year game. That's great.
One night a year game. It's very avant-garde. So like this is I think like a perfect example of like auteur theory. Like he's pushing the boundaries of like what a tabletop role-playing game is. I think he has a background in LARPs. A lot of this is like LARP or LARP adjacent stuff. So he's doing sort of like interesting stuff there. These are the kind of things.
Right, you're flipping through the manual. You're sitting where you're sitting matters. Yeah, a lot of those.
Yes,
fun things. Yeah.
The kind of things that you can kind of only do as a solo project or as a largely individual. But it's cool that he's seen some success and is able to keep doing this because it's out there, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I have to add is that the writing in 1,000 Year Vampire is also just amazing.
It's
and
phenomenal.
Obviously that's not, that doesn't make one an auteur, but I've tried a lot of solo RPGs and that one has gripped me like no other one has, even if I don't have a good way to explain why it was so good.
It's very, I need to play more to be able to like get a good sense for this, but like there's something about the way that it's written and structured that makes it so much more compelling than any other that I've played. And I've played and liked others, but it is a masterpiece. Yeah.
We've talked about 6 or 7 auteurs, depending on how you count so far. There's obviously a lot more. And also, maybe all of this doesn't matter. Maybe auteur theory is
maybe we're wrong. Maybe this isn't right.
Silly.
Yeah.
But at the very least, it was a fun way to organize talking about some cool mechanic and design innovations in TTRPGs.
I think there's something here. You may disagree, listeners. If you do disagree, by all means, tell us. Write us at dmofnone@gmail.com.
Right, Rob, at personal address insert here.
Yeah, write me specifically if you're angry.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of these designers are really interesting, and like with a filmmaker that some people consider an auteur that I personally like, if these people make a new game, I'm gonna check it out.
Yes.
So that's my
I'm interested
criteria really at the end of the day.
That's the same for me. Like I'm interested to see what they produce. I've given Monty Cook a lot of money comparatively, like almost as much money as I've given to Wizards. And I don't buy everything that he puts out, but I'm always interested. I always want to see like what it is. And the same for Tim Hutchings and the same for John Harper. I'm interested in sort of like the evolution of their craft, their design. I think it's cool to watch as those ideas and themes develop, and ideally an auteur will continue to get better. Some of them stall, some of them keep making the same thing over and over again, and it's fine, but it's boring. But like something that I find interesting about any sort of artist is like watching their evolution as their creativity matures and changes, and that's cool with TTRPGs. I think there's some interesting stuff happening here, and all of these people, all of the ones that we mentioned, whatever they put out, everything all these people has put out has been interesting. At least it hasn't always been the thing that I want to play, but they're doing cool stuff, which is more than we can say for a lot of studios that exist, such as they are.
Right. Yeah. Again, I play a studio produced game every 2 weeks. Is it a great game that I love? Absolutely. Is reading the rules and thinking about the mechanics and vision of the game the interesting part of that one? No, it's not. But with these games, it tends to be. So I guess if you think there's someone that should be on this list that we didn't include, we had to like try and give ourselves some strenuous criteria, like more than one game, and please tell us we're wrong. Drop us a line to tell us who we skipped over, who maybe the newest auteurs that are going to be considered auteurs, and another generation of game designers will look back to. Who are those people? Let us know.
Well, I mean, we'll probably inevitably do a part 2 or 3 or so on of this, and I have a whole list of, I don't know, who I consider up and coming auteurs that don't quite fit our criteria. You will notice that most of these are Gen X and Boomer white men, and that's just sort of like a function of the millennials. A couple of millennials. It's a function of just the way that the hobby has existed, but I think there's a lot of people up and coming who are not, and who are doing really cool things and just need more time to develop games. Yeah, let us know who you think that we skipped, who we should talk about. Let us know if you think that this framework is useful. Anything else that we should cover that we missed. Don't get mad if we got something wrong, or do. Whatever. Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Or it's all fake, which I think is
all fake.
An interesting argument you can make. And if you want to support the show, you can head over to patreon.com/Dungeon Master of None. So thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and keep rolling them dice.
I am Dungeon Master.
You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice.